My name is Sam Harahan, Harahan. I'm here to discuss the work of the Council for Court Excellence because I was the founding executive director of the organization in 1982.
All right, so founding executive director, did you guys draw straws, flip a coin? How did you get stuck with that task?
The Council for Court Excellence was formed as an outgrowth of a major research study that the Unified Bar did. And I was the research director of that study. And it became very clear that the many recommendations that we developed were not self-executing, and that we needed to basically have a vehicle that could address the myriad recommendations ranging from the adoption of a one-day, one-trial jury system to improvements in public access to many other proposals that we had identified during our DC Bar research study. A broader reason I drew the short straw, so to speak, it actually was the long straw, but was the fact that I was a non-lawyer and still am. And I was working in an environment with principally members of the bar, and they often didn't appreciate the fact that us lay people actually pay the bills for the lawyers. We actually serve on juries. We actually are crime victims. And so having the ordinary man in the streets viewpoint about the administration of justice, which I felt I represented, if you will, was an important element. And so when we founded the Council for Court Excellence, we consciously reached out to members of the civic and business community to join with members of the bar and judges to be part of this organization. And it was a very I'm going
to ask you to hold that thought for me for just a moment. I'm going to do two things real quick.
Can I come
A
in?
little loud down the hall, so I'm just going to close this.
Oh,
But
you're
of
still
course
here
welcome
picking up
to-
that?
Yeah.
Let me turn it up.
background noise.
Yeah, people don't realize, unless
Yeah.
they're in the business, how sensitive these microphones really are. But you can hear everything. A sip of water while I'm here.
Thank you, sir.
As long as I'm in the neighborhood, right?
Indeed.
Get out of the way.
Is Casey the new one in the family?
No. So this is a funny story, but it's a layer. So that started as a picture, the face is the picture of my first child. And the sign originally said, "Privacy, please. It's her fault," which I put up on the door whenever I was pumping for the baby.
Oh, okay.
And then when I finished pumping and I wasn't doing that anymore, they stole the picture and started decorating the baby. And so at times she would have a cowboy hat or different things.
Cute,
And
cute.
then Casey Anderson, who works with us,
Oh, okay.
decided to make the Casey paraphernalia. So it's just a very silly inside
Here, here.
office joke.
Here. Good.
Excellent. Okay, so we've just been covering the fact that you were honored to serve in the position of executive. In this case,
I was essentially the founder of the organization.
but because you're not a lawyer, you had a perspective on it that might help you shape the
Absolutely.
process of the...
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's keep going down that road.
Okay. As I said, when we founded the Council for Court Excellence, we consciously reached out to members of the civic community and the business community, as well as lawyers and judges, to be part of the organization. And our initial focus was to address the several hundred proposals which were part of the bar's research study, which is called in the trade the Horsky Committee report, in honor of the chairman of that particular committee. So we worked on many issues coming out of that bar research report. And probably the most significant issue in the first 5 to 10 years in terms of the general community's awareness of our work was the work to craft and get enacted by the U.S. Congress a jury reform statute, which set up the one-day, one-trial system. That had huge impact on both people's daily lives, but also on segments of the business community. I remember a major insurance car car insurance carrier who is on our board of directors, indicating that they tracked jury awards, and that when the one-day, one-trial jury system came into the District of Columbia, you could tell the month that it came into play because the jury pool was broadened, and as a result, people who basically had to pay the bills on some of these kinds of things were part of the deliberations in the juries, and I think the assumption was that the jury awards were reduced post one-day, one-trial. It certainly wasn't an anti-jury award project, but it was an issue of spreading the load in terms of fairness for members of the community to serve on jury duties and improving the pool and stuff. So in any event, let me shift a little bit to the three kind of purposes that we had for the organization when we created it. The first purpose was to support the courts. The Unified Bar, which is the mandatory organization in the city, is not able to take on endorsements of specific needs in the courts without a very elaborate process, et cetera, et cetera. And it seemed to us that there were many situations ranging from pay raises for judges to other issues of needs in the courts, might be more interpreter services and this, that, and the other, where a timely supportive voice would be important. And so support for the courts was one of our founding purposes. Working on improvements in the courts was also a founding purpose, and probably ended up being 60% of our bandwidth in terms of areas that we worked on in terms of administration of justice improvements. And then the third was promoting public understanding of the courts. The courts are kind of like, medical issues, that until you have an ache in your stomach, you don't really think about how my GI tract is working. And until you're, a victim of some type of issue, it could be a small claims case or this, that, and the other, you really don't pay attention to the administration of justice. And so over time, we developed a whole variety of public education tools and resources, and the organization continues to do that. And they're usually of very pragmatic value. For example, one of my favorites was a little brochure called Collecting the Money. And a lot of us lay people think that when you go to small claims court, which has a low fee to file and this, that, and the other, and the judge says, yes, the dry cleaner messed up your wedding dress and you're owed $600, you think you'll go to the next window and some clerk will write you a check for $600. Not at all. What you have then is a license to look, And so the collecting the money was basically, how do you attach a bank account? How do you garnish your wages? What are the steps you can take? And so if you have to hire a lawyer, which might cost you $500, for your $600 wedding dress, it's kind of like it defeats the purpose. So in any event, many of our brochures, ranging from victim rights to things like probate reform and others, were really tried to direct itself to a lay audience. And to be honest with you, that was always a big challenge, because the people who often were drafting these brochures initially were one of two groups. One were members of our board of directors who cared. I found the most valuable drafters were, quite frankly, college interns, because they were the closest to normal people, who didn't understand what a 2507 hearing was, or what the things that Misty and the lawyers in this world kind of understand. Well, everybody knows that. Not at all, And so the college interns that we had in the organization over a period of years were just terrific about some of those particular public education tools and stuff. So anyway, that's kind of a Cliff Notes version of the organization's purposes and how it came to be. Let me shift a little bit to the personality.
I'm going to ask you to pause just for a moment for me. I'm hearing just little dings and things outside, so I'm going to close this door. Most of them. I'm hearing your paper rustle. So if you want perfect, pristine audio, I'm going to ask you to not.
Gracious.
This is exciting. I know how solid the sound is. Yeah. No, thank you.
Well, that's why I keep stopping for what seem like minor traffic noises, because they're not minor when you're listening to these.
Right.
That's really
These super ears.
Well, usually I put people to sleep, so it's just it's a pleasure that you're still staying awake. But anyway.
I'm sorry. I paused you as you were going to start down a different tack. Do you remember what it was?
Yes, sir. I was going to describe a little bit about the initial board of directors and the initial leadership of the organization. The Council for Court Excellence was very fortunate in having.
I'm also hearing that.
I think that's your cell phone.
That's
too.
my phone. Let me just.
Yeah, gotta put it on stun.
Yes, right, okay. The Council for Court Excellence was very fortunate in its initial leadership, and I'm not speaking of staff leadership, I'm speaking particularly of board leadership. We had an individual who was, one judge on the Court of Appeals described Mr. Charles Horsky as a moral authority figure, and that when Mr. Horsky said something, there was no question about, what's his agenda, where is he coming from, and this, that, and the other. And I saw that play out many times involving our work. His involvement in the District of Columbia and in the nation was really just exemplary. He had served in the White House as President Kennedy's special assistant for national capital affairs. He was known as the czar or the mayor of Washington long before we had a mayor of Washington and stuff, because the buck stopped at Mr. Horsky's desk, ultimately at the president's desk, of course. But in any event, he was just a pillar of the bar, and he told me when he was chairing the Horsky Committee that he was appointed to that role because he'd never set foot in the local court system. And that when you're doing an evaluation study of the local court, you don't want someone who's kind of biased. But in any event, he was just terrific. He also happened to be a senior partner in the most prestigious, or one of the small number of prestigious law firms we had in the early 80s. There are many good firms, don't misunderstand, but if you want to talk about the pillars of the bar, Covington and Burling, Wilmer Cutler Pickering, Hogan and Hartson, Aaron Fox, I mean, they're Arnold and Porter, I mean, there are 6 or 7 that were part of that ultimate atmosphere. And so when we were looking, for example, to do fundraising, the fact that Covington and Burling had already stepped up and said, we will support this organization and get behind it, just went enormously far in terms of our getting underwriting support from many other law firms in the community. In addition, Mr. Horsky's leadership helped us and helped me personally in any number of instances working with the courts. You have to understand that the role of the executive director, at least when I was in the organization, there was always a tension between the parties that we were working with, namely the courts, and ourselves as an independent actor. And in our world, in our society, judges really, their role in our lives are to kind of stand above the fray and then, make some judgments when people bring disputes to them and stuff. Well, we were kind of standing above the judges saying, well, why did you come into work late? Or why were you disrespectful to that juror? Or why did you do this? And, they didn't like to hear that kind of stuff. And so, I took a lot of grief, if you will, from some judges who kind of lost, in my opinion, sometimes lost their appreciation of the fact that they're public servants. They work for the rest of us, and that I have enormous respect for the third branch of government. I mean, it's a difficult role to play, but it doesn't mean that they're God. It doesn't mean that they're infallible and this and the other. And so we would occasionally, call issues to their attention, and in some instances it ruffled feathers. And I can remember Mr. Horsky, and any number of times he would call me. He says, "Sam, you've done it again." It's like, well, what's up, Mr. Horsky? And he said, well, I just got a call from the chief judge, and he's very upset. And it's like, usually it was, as far as I was concerned, it was a non-issue. To give you one small example, I had a TV station wanting to do a interview about sentencing reform, and they had a judge from Maryland and a judge from Virginia, and they were looking for a DC judge. So I recommended Judge A, who happened to be chairing the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, if you will, that the chief judge had appointed. Well, the gentleman declined after talking to the chief judge. So then I recommended another jurist who was a retired judge and this and the other who'd taken a real interest in the issue. He checked with the chief judge and was told not to do it. He declined. So after the 3rd or 4th time, I basically, we had to punt and stuff. So I suggested a judge who no longer worked in the city, used to work in the city, and so he ended up serving and stuff. Well, the chief judge got wind of this and was very upset. And so, when Mr. Horsky called me, and I said, well, Charlie, there's good news and bad news. And he said, well, tell me the good news, Sam, because I had pissed off the chief judge. And I said, well, the good news is he's reading his mail. I didn't think I was wrong to basically want to have a member of our local bench be part of that radio or TV program. I mean, that's how citizens get their understanding. They don't get it from me. They get it mostly from the media. They get it mostly from, the neighbor next door and this and the other. And so I thought it was, and I still think it's very important to have judges visible and judges seen by members of the community because they're doing important work for us, and I think that they really need our support. But they also are not infallible. So anyway, the initial leadership at the board level, I can remember when I had the idea to start the Council for Court Excellence, which, by the way, is patterned after an organization in New York City called the Fund for Modern Courts. And then in the course of the work on the bar research study, I had gone to New York several times to meet with the people in the Fund for Modern Courts. And I was very enamored with, that was an organization that was headed by, as I recall, Cyrus Vance Sr. And David Rockefeller. Cyrus Vance being a pillar of the legal community and David Rockefeller being a pillar of the business community and stuff. And their focus was on the state courts in the state of New York and stuff. And they had citizens on their board and this and the other. And I thought, well, gee, we should have something like that in Washington. And so they were kind enough to help when we did the original meeting to interest people in the work of the Council for Court, well, the work that could lead to the Council for Court Excellence. This was like in the fall of 1981, as I recall. We founded the group in 1982. I had the executive director of the New York Fund for Modern Courts, a woman named Fern Scher, come down and give essentially the luncheon remarks. Then I gave remarks on, here are some of the key issues coming out of the bar's Horsky Committee report that are not self-executing, and that somebody has got to carry these things forward if we're going to make the kind of improvements we need to make in our community that the bar research study identified, et cetera, et cetera. In any event, I'm kind of wandering around here, but William Slate, who was then the clerk of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, went on to be the president of the American Arbitration Association for about 15 years and was a college classmate of mine and a debate partner of mine for 4 years of college and stuff. Anyway, Bill was kind enough, we had lunch over at the Washington Hotel, and he said, well, what are you going to do when the Horsky Committees are done? And I said, well, I got this idea of creating a group broader than the Horsky Committee, but that includes the business community, the civic community, and the judges and lawyers, and basically who would work together kind of like the Fund for Modern Courts, except we would also look at the federal courts here in Washington as well as the local courts and stuff. And he said, well, I'm in the young lawyer section of the ABA, and I've got a lot of people in my Rolodex who work in firms like Williams and Connolly and other firms, and he says, I'd be happy to help you with that. And so we must have had 5 or 6 meetings in Fredericksburg. He would drive up and I would drive down, and we would do things like, well, what should we call the organization? And what should its purposes be? And what should, how should we frame it? And how should we fund it? And, anyway, it was just those kinds of and we basically, he and I went together to see Charlie Horsky. And, I remember fast forwarding 25 years later when Mr. Horsky died, I spoke at his, I offered eulogy remarks at his funeral, and I said that in my 20 years working with Mr. Horsky, I had 1,000 meetings with him in the 20 years, And I mean, must have been twice a week I would drop by. There'd be a news article that brought my attention to some injustice in a minute, and I would run up the flagpole with Charlie and stuff. But, well, this was perhaps an early in that 1,000 meeting chronology. And basically we were saying, Charlie, we have this idea of forming this organization. You would be the ideal person to lead it. And Charlie was very self-effacing in this and the other. And he says, Sam, if you're going to be involved, I'm happy to do it, kind of routine. And Charlie was once described by a senior member of the African-American legal community here in Washington, a man named Willie Leftwich, who joined our board of directors. And he said, Charlie Horsky is the kind of guy who does not, when he comes on the football field, he's not wearing a number. You want him to be the water boy, he'll be the water boy. You want him to be the quarterback, he'll be the quarterback. You want him to be, And so, in our life, particularly in Washington and working with legal community, everybody wants to be on stage. Everybody wants to be out front. Everybody wants to be, the name on the program and this and that. Mr. Horsky didn't give a damn. just let's get the job done kind of routine. And so he was just a wonderful person, and my mentor, if you will. And it was really one of the privileges of my life to work for as long as I did with Mr. Horsky. But anyway, Bill
Can I
Sleek.
pause you just for a second?
This is really fun, Sam. I love hearing you say this. This is going to be really great.
I'm going to ask you to swish your mouth out with some of this water.
Thank you, sir.
You got a really smart guy on camera. Is there stuff that you need to cover?
Yeah, we're going to do 30. Yeah, I want to do a. Can I?
Absolutely. I just keep rambling,
No,
so
I love it. I'm gonna.
The rambles are perfectly on target. That's why I haven't stopped you.
No, that's right. So does it help you if I'm talking? Does it
Sure,
help you?
yeah,
Can you stick
yeah.
with him and if I stay over here?
You're just going to give me cues?
as long as you don't rattle.
I know, I'll stop moving stuff.
And let me, and I know you're sensitive, but you're going to come across much clearer if you're not wearing a mask.
I don't think that, the goal is not necessarily to have me.
Okay, fine, okay.
Well, I'll do it though, to your point, just in
We
case.
should talk about whether you want to take a moment and deliver direct messages to the award recipients while I'm here today.
I'm not gonna put myself in the videos, because I
Okay.
will be on site. So no,
Okay.
we're good with the folks. Thank you though.
Sure.
So I love these stories. I wanted to see the two things that are organization-wide that I want to add, and then I'm going to ask you two project set of questions.
Mhm.
But the one would be, what was to the extent that even during your
20,
tenure,
yeah, my 20 years, right.
and you saw the mission evolve a little bit,
Mhm.
and the approaches evolve a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the way that the focus changed over time and why?
I'd be happy to.
I'll make a note. Because she's here, I need you to make sure you maintain your attention to the camera.
Certainly.
Pause, then look over at her if you want to get a response or get a sense of whether you've covered the topic she wanted you to cover. But I need those pauses so that I can edit.
Okay, good. Should I rephrase the question, or is that?
It would be delightful if you could include some of the context of the question. in your
Okay,
answer.
okay. The question has come up from time to time as to whether the mission of the organization expanded and broadened and changed over time. And while I certainly would acknowledge that fact, I think we by and large, and I will speak to some examples in a second, but I think by and large we tried to stay true to the core mission of focus mostly on the courts as opposed to on the pretrial area or on the probation area or on the prison area or on the law enforcement area and this and the other. And that was largely a function of the fact that there were other organizations that were involved solely on those topics, but it didn't seem to be a citizen-based group that was looking at and focused on supporting the courts and how can we make our courts more effective and stuff. Now, an example of our broadening our focus is that sometime maybe 10 years after the organization was created, there was what when I worked in the city for, I guess I came to work in the city in 1972, and so I was already in the city 15 or 20 years by the time this issue came up again. But there's this repeating issue of police overtime for court appearances, and it was just a blame game. The police would blame the prosecutor would blame the judges would say, it's not us, it's them, et cetera, et cetera. And so I reached out to the chief judge at the time, I think a man named Eugene Hamilton, and said, Your Honor, it seems to me that we're not getting anywhere. And if it would assist you and the other parties of the system, for the Council for Court Excellence to take a serious look at police overtime for court appearances, which at that time was running about $10 million a year. He said, well, if I'd be happy to convene a meeting, Mr. Harahan, in which you can kind of make that case to the U.S. Attorney, to the police chief, and this and the other, and then we can kind of go from there. And so out of that came an initiative that was supported by the local federal grant program from the Justice Department, and enabled us to do really what I guess they call currently a deep dive we did a heavy data crunch, and we engaged another research organization to help us, and we produced a report that I think was of very specific value to the police leadership and to the other parties. And for a while, the overtime figure was down. I understand it's currently snuck back up and stuff. But in any event, that's an example of you might call mission creep, if you will. In a different context, there were other efforts that we would get into that were kind of a little bit tangential to our core mission, victim rights being an example in that particular regard. Crime victims are often lost in the shuffle in terms of the administration of justice. I mean, our parties in the system, the U.S. Attorney, the local prosecutor, offer a level of empathy, but they've also got a caseload of 200 cases, and so they can't spend but so much time. Well, hopefully it's the only time I've been mugged, or it's the only time my house has been burglarized, or it's the only time my car has been stolen, this, that, and the other. And it's important to me. It's important to me to make sure that there's somebody who is my advocate to redress the grievance, et cetera, et cetera. And so oftentimes, as I say, the victims their viewpoint got kind of pushed aside. And so we basically developed some legislation. We worked with other organizations and came up with a series of public education documents to help crime victims. We advocated at the D.C. City Council for crime victims. And so, again, that's not part of the core mission of the Council for Court Excellence, but it's an example of kind of reasonable project creep, if you want to call it that. And then there were a couple of instances where we were asked by, for example, I remember Congressman Tom Davis, who was then the head of the House District Committee. There was just a horrific story in the Washington Post, and it involved the fact that the FBI was not, or maybe it was the D.C. Police Department, I don't remember who was in charge there, was not testing rape kits. And so rape victims, in the criteria, it was a caseload issue. It was bullshit as far as I was concerned as a citizen. It's just unacceptable, their argument. But their argument was that, well, unless we have a perpetrator identified, we're not going to test the rape kit and stuff. And it's like, what? I mean, you put this lady through a very unpleasant experience, in a hospital setting and this, that, and the other, and you're not going to test the rape kits? I mean, how do you know who's the perpetrator and stuff? So in any event, Davis said, what's needed. And the police chief said, well, I need, $3-4 million to get all these, well, we were contacted as being kind of the broker to help solve that particular problem and stuff. And so while we didn't get the $3-4 million, and it wasn't ours to have, we did help to address that particular issue and stuff. So we have from time to time been asked to undertake things which are broader. And it's also, I would say that it's a little bit a function of the style of the leadership of the courts. I mean, some of the judicial leadership has been very engaging and recognizing the value of an organization like the Council for Court Excellence, and other chief judges have just stonewalled the organization. And when Mr. Horsky was alive, I don't want to say they didn't get away with that, but I think that he had such presence and was able to basically, call their bluff, if you will. And there were other instances where, a clerk of the court would try to run the table on us or do something silly in terms of like we did a report on the probate division of the court at one point, and the courts said, well, please don't release that report publicly until we get back to you. And, well, I wrote a letter to them and said, we'll give you, maybe this was the first of the month, we'll give you till the end of the following month to get back to us. And at that point, we will release the report. Well, I released the report at the beginning of the third month, if you will, and it hit the fan. Okay, the courts were so upset with me for, you broke your promise, and I said, not at all. We gave you 60 days to look at the report, to get back to us. You never did. And we're releasing the report. And so, there were instances where, the courts would try to stonewall. We're a small civic organization. We're not, the Unified Bar. We're not, the Pentagon or something of that nature. And so we don't have the the horsepower to basically have our way, if you will. And so I guess the point I'm making is that the leadership, including the current leadership, sometimes staff leadership I'm talking about in particular, sometimes basically has to work in areas beyond the core of what we established the group for, in part because there's resources there and there's need there. And so, a member of the city council could say, we really need to look at issue X, which might be jail overcrowding. Can you do that? And say, well, if you can give us some resources, we can look at that. And so I think that there's just, you want to be responsive to the leadership of the community, as long as it's within the ambit of the core work of the organization. I think if they wanted us to, for example, count trash cans and would give us funding to count trash cans, I hope the executive committee and the board would say, that's an important issue, but it's not our issue. And so I think that that's really, I guess, my take initially on the subject. So,
bandwidth is important. What else you got?
All right, I'm going to do one other high-level question, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about the when someone dies history, and then
sure.
we're done.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are always very good at telling and honoring other people's stories, I would love just to have on record what you, looking back, want your legacy as a founder and leader of this organization. Like, what do you see sort of you hope your legacy will be, and what sort of, I think that's just a question.
Well, I'd be happy to speak to that. Thank you. I've been asked to address what I consider or would like my legacy in the organization to be, and I guess I'll ramble around on that subject in 2 or 3 different threads. Just yesterday, I was having lunch with several members of one of our founding or early corporate board members from the GEICO organization, and I shared with the gentleman that the work of a staff director of a civic organization that's trying to improve a branch of government is often very lonely work, and that I had a bulletin board in my office, and on that bulletin board I had a number of sayings, and one of the sayings was the reward of a job well done was to have done it. It's not the adulation you get, it's not the credit you get, it's the fact that that was important and we did it, if you will. If in terms of what motivates me, or what I always felt like as a non-lawyer in particular, my job, and I thought our job as an organization, wasn't to worry about whether the highfalutin $600,000 a year, bright as the sunlight lawyers got their day in court. Certainly, I want everyone to have access to the court system, but that I really felt like we were kind of representing the people who didn't have a voice. Okay. So it was very important to me for example, in the jury reform area, and we did multiple studies over periods of years in the jury area. I remember we were approached. Arizona had done a very important jury reform called the Power of 12 in Maricopa County, and an active member of our board who was a trial judge and very interested in jury issues said, "Can we do something like that here?" And I said, "I think it'd be a wonderful idea if we can raise the money and this and the other." And he said, "Well, I'm envisioning a committee of like 20 judges and a lawyer." And I said, "No, Your Honor." I said, "If we're going to be running it, it's going to be a third lawyers, a third judges, and a third citizens." Well, I know what the citizens' views are. Says, "Your Honor, you have no clue as to what the citizens, And so having the voice of the people who really don't have a voice. And the high point to me of that project was it was one of the final work groups of that study, and it kind of illustrates my point of the voice question, and that is that this judge was, the recommendation that was in draft by the committee at the point was something about the fact that after a jury trial is over, the judge should come back to the jury room and meet privately with the jurors to thank them. And the judge, who was part of the committee, said, I got a heavy calendar. I've already thanked them publicly from the bench. I don't have the time to do that. Is it really that important? And this lovely African-American woman board member says, Your Honor, yes, it's important. You have to do that. And so I think that it kind of moved the needle in terms of that judge's understanding of her role and the fact that, it's important and stuff. So, I often thought as I got into the Council for Court Excellence, what made me do this kind of work? And I remember as a child, my father was a child of a wealthy family in the railroad industry. And in his dad's will, his generation, my dad's generation, was going to get none of the proceeds from the estate. It was going to skip a generation to my generation. And my dad would once a year get the statements from the executor or whatever of what they've done with the corpus of the estate at that particular point. And there was a provision in the will, which I learned later has been thrown out of court all over the country, but again, for a non-lawyer, you don't know any better. And the provision was something about the fact that if anybody contests any aspect of the administration of its will, they will be disinherited, and their heirs will be disinherited. Well, that was a chilling effect. So my dad didn't have a voice. And so he would sit there and explain to me as a 12-year-old why the decisions being made, and the core decision was the executor was the president of the largest bank in the community that we grew up in. And 80% of the assets of the corpus were invested in bank stock, which paid no dividends, no interest, no whatever. So it was a honeypot for the bank, in terms of money. But in terms of the beneficiaries, we got screwed, And so it was always important to me that the voices of the civic members of the community be respected, and I think that's I think that needle has shifted. Just not to be critical, but I think we've got a board now which has got more retired lawyers as civic members than we do as non-lawyers who are civic members, and I think that I hope we can continue to work on that particular issue and stuff. But so I'm really hoping to that my legacy is both that the work we did and the creation of the organization made a difference. I'm aware that organizations like this one, 70% of them do not survive their founding executive director. And so I'm thrilled and delighted that even though we had a major blip on the road with my successor, who turned out to not work out for the organization and was released about 8 or 10 months after she was appointed, but the organization bounced back and regrouped, and I think is doing great work now. So.
Thank you.
Can I have some more water, sir?
Yes, sir. Hang on just a moment.
It's so nice to hear you be able to say that, and I'm glad we have the footage for you of your legacy story. These are so much fun. Okay, last one, Sam, and this is going to be one where I'm going to make you model what we're trying to do for other people.
Please. Okay.
Do you have a preference for? My thought was to ask you to do a quick 2-minute project snapshot of the when someone dies.
Yes.
Because I think we've got the sort of good one day one trial, which was the other one I was going to ask you to sort of do.
Okay.
Or you have a preference between jury appreciation or when someone dies as your sort of?
Well, I could talk about both, but I think when someone dies probably has more resonance and a longer shelf life, if you will.
So we're going to test this. I'm going to give you these questions, and I think our goal, based on what we told others, is try to do each of the answers as best you can in just like a few sentences.
Okay.
And then we'll see if we can have it. So speaking of the creation of the first when someone dies, sort of if you can speak to what led to the creation of that project and sort of where did the idea come from?
The Council for Court Excellence over a period of years has done many educational booklets, and one of them is called When Someone Dies. And it is, I think the subtitle is something like Information for Heirs and Legatees or Beneficiaries after a person's death. The initiative for that project, like many things in the organization, came from a member of the board of directors. And it was a woman named Ellen Eager. And Ellen basically was handling the affairs of a member of her family, and yet when when the person died, she had to hire a lawyer to do the basic things that she had been doing all along for an aunt or an uncle or whatever. And so we formed a small committee and developed this particular booklet, shared the draft with members of the bench, as we do on all of our documents like that, and with the probate bar, and published the document. It's been, interestingly, we've had wonderful cooperation from the corporate community. Geico, I think, insurance company, has published something like 250,000 of those guides over the last 25 years and stuff. So it's really, at least, and I haven't looked back recently, but it was an enormously successful booklet, and something that's really resonated across the community.
So elaborate on that, which is why do you think that has been so impactful and well received in the community? Why is that project so unique and important?
The project is important, that booklet and others like it, but specifically that booklet is important because I remember when I first proposed this idea to the executive committee, one of the trial lawyers on the group, Steve Grafman by name, said, "Why do we care about that?" And it's like, well, 2,500 people a year at that point, as I recall, die in the District of Columbia, and so we need to be thinking about their role in the administration of justice and their family's role in administration of justice. And so the impetus, as I said, for it came from the experience of a member of our board of directors, and there's a lot of aspects of the probate system don't need legal training. Assembling the information about who are the heirs and their addresses, assembling information about the assets of the decedent, et cetera, and that having a lot of that information available, there are terms that are useful in the legal community, but lay people, like publish against creditors, or the timetable for this or the timetable for that. We put a lot of that information in lay terms in the booklet. My recollection is we had a checklist of the things you need to do after 3 months and after 6 months and this, that, and the other. And it, I remember one of the sweetest notes I got in my work at the council was I got a $15 check from a woman who says, "I live in Ward 8. I went to the local library after my Aunt Tilly passed, and I was, handling all Tilly's affairs. I had no idea. I picked up your booklet, and it was a godsend." And I get emotional. I wanted to just thank this, the group for doing that and stuff. So anyway, that's why we do it. So I lost my patience. Oh, cool. So anyway, so that's why we do it. So.